Welcome to the Holy Smokes Podcast, a show about faith, friendship, fine tobacco, and drink. I'm Steve Ryder, and I'm not in the Lion's Den. I am in northern Wisconsin, outside of Rhinelander, in the North Woods, and I'm with Phil Frasier. Phil, welcome to the podcast.
It's great to be here with you.
So, first question, what you smoking?
I am smoking a Fuente Grand Reserve. I love it.
Cool. And I just started on one I have not tried yet. It is a Gurkha Cellar Reserve. Those that are in the Holy Smokes group know I love to bash Gurkhas. I had yesterday, you had these Blend Masters cask, and I had one of these. Says it's aged 15 years. And the Blend Masters cask was a good one.
Yeah.
It was actually really good. And this one, you actually started it.
I started it and put it down and went back to the Fuente.
Yeah. So this one started out a little harsh, but let's see how it goes as we go. Mm-hmm. And Curtis Wilson, I've had 2 Gurkhas in the last 24 hours. So
wow.
One of them I actually liked.
Yeah.
So Phil.
They were my first, so I never had them before.
Yeah. So Phil, you're originally from the Rhinelander area.
Born and raised here. Yeah.
And you have a business, a family-owned business that's been around 103 years?
103 years, yeah.
Talk about it.
My great-grandfather came here from out east and went into the plumbing trade and started a plumbing business, and he moved to Rhinelander and hung up his shingle and did West Side Plumbing at first, and then it turned to Frasier's Plumbing and Heating. Shortly after that, in the 20s, when my grandfather took it over. My great-grandfather died when my grandfather was, I think, 19. And so my grandpa had to take the business over then at 19. And my great-grandfather was kind of like the town drunk in a little bit. And my grandfather said nobody wanted, the town drunk's kid working for him or doing anything. And so he went around and hung these signs up all around town and said he'd put any water heater in under any condition for $18 back in the 20s.
Yeah.
$18.
Yeah.
And so he just gained a lot of customers, and my grandpa was loved by many people, helped a lot of people, and really is what built the relation side of our business with our community. And then my father took it over in the 80s, and then Joanne and I came here in 96 and came back to the family business.
Yeah. Now, growing up here in the Rhinelander area, I mean, there's not a whole lot up here.
No.
It's low population and north woods of Wisconsin, lots of fishing, lots of hunting, that kind of stuff. But in terms of culture and civilization, this is pretty small town, sparsely populated, not a lot of big towns around here. You gotta drive a long ways to get to a Costco or that kind of stuff.
3.5 hours, I think, is our closest Costco.
So what was it like growing up here?
Well, when I was a kid, everybody knew everybody. You knew when there was a tourist or out-of-town person came in, you're like, who's that? Because everybody knew everybody. And we live in a town, it's been 7,000 to 8,000 my whole life, and we're the biggest town in the 3 counties. Most of the other little towns, Eagle River, Minocqua, all those little tourist towns, they're, 1,200, 1,500 people. Mm-hmm. High tourism area. In the summer, our population, probably is about tenfold of what it is now. Mm-hmm. And there's some beautiful lake homes up here and homes on islands, and largest inland chain in the world is up here, chain of lakes in 3 Lakes area. So growing up here was, there's paper mill people, there's the paper mills, and those have been, all the old logging camps, and my great-grandma, she cooked at the logging camp for all the guys in the CCC camps back in the day, and she lived to be 103, and still remember her and her big hands and the way she could cook, and the coffee she could make was like in these old-fashioned pots, but it was so good. Yeah. And her pancakes and syrup and stuff, but it was, that's how we grew up, and we grew up working hard, but we played hard too. Yeah. And we loved the outdoors, and some of my early memories with my grandpa were he had this big old oak table, and he'd lay the map. It was like a big blown up map of our area. And he'd give me a fillet knife and say, all right, close your eyes and drop it. And I'd drop it, and with the closest lake it stuck to, he'd say, let's go fish.
Yeah.
That's kind of fun stuff like that.
Yeah.
Too. So, but we worked hard and played hard.
Now, you grew up in a big family.
Mm-hmm.
You were number 7 of 9.
7 of 9. I had 6 sisters and 2 brothers.
What was that like growing up?
Eventful. It was, at first we had 1 bathroom and 4 bedrooms. My parents had 1, and there was, 3 bedrooms for all of us to share. And then I remember one day my dad, my 2 brothers and I, and we broke up the basement floor, and we put a bathroom in the basement, and that was the boys' bathroom then. So we had a shower stall and a toilet and all that. So this was like finally a second bathroom with 6 sisters,
Yeah.
It was like,
yeah.
But it was, we were in sports, and we're all working at the family business, and we were open on Saturdays then full time with a hardware store, and my mom had a bath shop, like the Bath Boutique, I think it was called, and sold wood stoves and rebuilt pumps and faucets and, cutting well pipe for people on Saturdays growing up, and a lot of stuff I didn't like but took for granted what we learned, growing up.
Yeah. And all those older sisters, you told me a story yesterday as we were driving around seeing the town. Your sister went to high school with Mike Webster.
My oldest sister was in the same class as Mike, and
now, for those that don't know, Mike Webster was a Hall of Fame center for the Steelers, won 4 Super Bowls with the Steelers, then went on to play for the Chiefs and retire with the Chiefs, inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame, and I think it was 97, the 97 class. And for me, Mike Webster was a hero growing up. There was something about, so I remember getting these football sticker books when I was in early elementary school, I think it was 2nd grade, and you get the sticker and you get the book, and you put the sticker in the book, and I just remember looking and seeing Mike Webster, Tomahawk, Wisconsin, and played for the Badgers. I was big into He-Man, and he looked like a real-life He-Man. I mean, the guy had biceps like no one else I ever saw in the NFL.
Yeah.
And
he was the strongest man in the NFL, I think, 3 years in a row when they had those contests and stuff. But I remember being really, I was little and probably less than 10, and all these high school kids, I think they were juniors or seniors, and they came over to our house, and Mike was a standout, obviously.
Yeah.
And everybody was talking about him, that he was going to go, play for the Badgers. And so I was like, I had to, and I could, we all listened to the AM radio back then when the games were played, and we'd have them on, and we were real close, as I showed you. We'd like right through the woods from the stadium. So I'd go outside, and I could see the lights, and I could hear the cheering, and I could hear the announcer, Todd McEldowney. I could hear him over the loudspeaker. So when Mike Webster and the other guys came to our house, I kept trying to sneak in the living room to get a peek at them and getting chased out by my sisters. But it was really, really neat to see that and then watch his career and know he came from our town.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
the Rhinelander Hodag.
Hodag. Now talk about the Hodags, because that was an interesting story. The mascot for the town is a mythical creature.
It's a mythical creature, and a guy named Gene Shepard came up with this probably around the turn of the century, and he was a real, trying to get people to come into the Northwoods and try to affect the tourism. So he came up with this story about the Hodag and this mythical creature, and did all these, like, he'd enact like a play. People would come, and he'd actually have like a play he'd enact, and he would talk about the Hodag, and then he had these taxidermists make these with real fur and real horns, and you can look it up online, the Hodag, but it's a crazy creature, and it's been our mascot, which is really unique. And Mike Webster was one of the best Rhinelander Hodags ever. So,
now, growing up, it wasn't a healthy environment for you. Talk about that.
Well, our family, my mom and dad were high school sweethearts. Both came from, especially my mom, pretty dysfunctional family. And they got married and with 9 kids. I mean, it's like, and here we go. But there was a lot of pretty severe abuse in our family. And we had the police at our house. You know, I remember probably 4 times the police being at our house. And it just was a really tough situation with abuse, and especially one of my sisters was abused really bad by my mother, physically. And, you know, and I try to protect her. And some of the siblings avoided and just kind of stayed busy, and I would just fight and protect for Mary. And it was, a lot of not real good memories, but thankfully God intervened later. And
talk about that.
So
it's a really amazing story.
Yeah, so I was in high school, and I had moved out when I was 16, just taken off. I came back, and so I was a junior then, and just turned 17. And I'd been working in the family business, and my brother and I were working on a project. He's a year older than me. We were working on a project at a racquetball court with a plumber, and this plumber would come to the job, the master plumber that worked for my dad. We had 40-some employees, but this one guy was new, and he kind of intimidated us. He was a big guy, and he would tell us, all right, here's what you do, dig this ditch, lay this pipe, put it in this way. My brother and I were not plumbers. We knew plumbing, but we weren't plumbers. And so You
said he was a master level plumber.
He was a master plumber.
Yeah.
So you got to go through about 8 years to get your master plumber's license. And anyway, so we did this racquetball club, and some of the plumbing wasn't right. And the owner of the racquetball club, he could have, had a lawsuit or whatever, or had us make things right, and which we did. Our family did make right. But the plumbing wasn't right because me and my brother were left alone in high school to do it while this guy was off gallivanting and drinking. And so my dad, I remember he was going to go meet with this guy, and it was the big meeting, and we were all kind of nervous about it. And my dad was going to go meet with him and talk to him about how to make this right. Mm-hmm. So I went out with my friends that night, and I got back early. It's probably 11 o'clock at night, and I got back, and my dad was home, and I said, well, how'd that go? How'd your meeting go? And this guy had a really, really, super high voice, extremely high. I've never heard anything like that out of a guy before. It was his voice. Mm-hmm. And so we kind of made fun of him, my brother and I did, and so I said, how'd your meeting go with Dick Mork? And he said, I don't know how to tell you this. I said, what do you mean? I said, how'd it go? And he said, well, I'm born again. And I said, what are you talking about? And now, to back up, my dad had never, ever been affectionate with me or any of us. Hardly saw him smile. No hugs.
You said they fought every morning at breakfast.
Every morning. There was fights every single morning.
Between your parents?
My parents, yep. Damn it to hell anyway, you son of a bitch. I'd hear from, sorry, but
yeah.
That's what I heard every morning from my mom, almost every morning, to my dad. And just the fighting and slamming of cupboards, and it was just a bad situation. And so all of a sudden, this one night when I come home and my dad says this to me, he starts approaching me to tell me that he all of a sudden had God in his life or something. And I was like, this is weird. And I felt like he was going to try and give me a hug, and I backed off because I'm like, what is this? And so I just literally said, whatever floats your boat. And I said, I'm going to bed. And I went to bed. Next morning, I'm thinking, this has to have gone away. Whatever this was, I don't know what this is. Not my dad. I don't know if he was drinking or if he was, and he didn't really drink at all, hardly. And I was like, what is going on with him? Well, the next morning, he tries to talk to me again. And I just left for school. And all day, I couldn't get it off my mind. I'm like, what is going on? Well, then 2 weeks later, and my parents have told me this story, I was sleeping, but my mom elbows my dad in the middle of the night. He's sleeping. And she'd been seeing this change in him, and he's been talking to her, along with the man that led him to the Lord. And she's elbowing him, and she says, I need to do this in my life too. Yeah, so they got down on their knees in their bedroom, and she gave her life to the Lord. And then it got really weird. So my dad's trying and my mom's trying, and they're starting to say, I love you and stuff. And I'm like, what is going on? It was just
so foreign to you.
Oh, it was like, I felt like I was in a movie or something. It was very, very strange. And
so, I mean, really, you were 16 or 17 years old at the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you lived with this abuse in the house, this chaotic, toxic household, and all of a sudden it radically shifts. Just like that.
It was a radical shift. And I mean, horrible physical abuse to a few of us. And if you can imagine it, it happened other than sexual. But it was,
Well, you told me about...
I had my head stuck in a toilet full of poop, and my mom was trying, she kept holding me down because I had been helping my sister, who had to stand outside for hours and hours and hours in the rain and cold and wet her pants, and I went to bring her pants and clean pants. And so there's lots of stories that I'm grateful are gone and done, but so this was a huge change. And my dad was leaving my mom notes saying he loved her. And I'm like, what is this? It's like, it was just really different. So this guy who led my dad to the Lord came over to our house, and I would sit at the basement steps, and I wouldn't go out when I knew he was going to be there to do a Bible study, because I wanted to hear what this was. And I couldn't hear my mom and dad's voices real well, but I told Dick later, I said, you were given a high voice because there's a little guy that was sitting at the bottom of the steps that could only hear you and your voice. And I heard everything he said as they were going through this Bible study in the book of Revelation. And I kept sticking around, and my dad didn't notice it, and my mom didn't, but Dick did. And he was very sensitive to the fact. And I had been in so much trouble, expelled from school and always in trouble, and fights with my hockey coach, fights with the swim coach. It was like, so I sat down there and I listened and listened. Well, then he said, what do you think if we go show a movie? And it was the old reel film, the old reel films. And so this was in 79, and in September of 79. And so he said, let's go to the racquetball court. So where it all started, we'll go in the basement, and we're going to invite people. And they showed the movie, I think, Distant Thunder, Thief in the Night, that whole series from the 70s.
Yep.
And he said, Phil, do you want to come help? And I said, yeah. My dad was like, really? I said, yeah, I want to come help. So I went and helped, and I don't remember who was there. There was a lot of people there. But I just remember that I watched that film, and I was like, this is what changed my parents. And as corny as those films kind of are when you look at them now, I'm one of the lives that it touched and affected.
Oh, yeah.
And we were done that night, and we were packing everything up. And I remember I had like butterflies like you get before a game. And I had these butterflies, and I was just like anxiety and nervous. And Dick noticed it, and he said, Phil, do you want to talk? And I said, yeah, I do. And he's like, do you want to pray? And I said, I don't know how. Yeah, but I do. And he led me to the Lord. Mm-hmm. With my dad there. So then my dad, the next morning, this was really awkward, but he came up to me, and he had a note for me, and he gave me a note, and he said, I love you, brother. And I was like, what does that mean? I had never, and he gave me a hug, and I just kind of stood there as he gave me that hug. And he said, I'll be praying for you while you're at school, because, I know the friends you're with and all the stuff that you got going on in your life. And, again, I had run away, I'd been gone and living at a friend's house, and then this all happened. But that was in 1979 when my dad gave his life to the Lord, it was an extreme change, and my mom. And my dad ended up being best man at my wedding. Mm-hmm. He has been just a great friend, and my mom, in a relationship that I thought would never, ever be there. Mm-hmm. So it's pretty cool. So.
And they're still around.
My dad's, they're both 88, and my dad's got Parkinson's super bad, but They live right through the woods here, about 100 yards around the bay.
And you're on this little lake
Yep.
in northern Wisconsin, just a beautiful view out the back porch.
Mm-hmm.
It's an idyllic place to just hang out, and it's been a great time up here with you.
Well,
Thank you for letting me come up and hang.
Oh, I'm glad you're here. I'm really glad you're here. Yeah, it's a great place. We're very blessed to live here and have my parents here and my aunt and uncle right around the corner. And my grandpa bought this land back in the 30s, and I'm really glad he did.
Yeah. So for you, though, the change in your life wasn't as instantaneous as your parents.
No. My parents, it was like a light switch. For me, it was like a dimmer switch. It took a long time, and I had to go through, more stuff with, I was with a crazy group of friends, good people, just crazy group of friends. And it was a process over probably 2 years to the point where I finally was like, I need to get serious about this. And I have a little New Testament sitting in the house where I remember when my mom gave me that, the date's still written in it. And I just started reading it and just highlights and notes. And, I was hitchhiking all around the country and trying to figure stuff out. And that little Bible was with me everywhere. And then I ended up in Kansas City at Kansas City Youth for Christ and helping build a Bible camp down there. And that's where God really, really got a hold of me. And my faith became real at that point.
How old were you?
I would have been 19 and 20, that time period. And that's when, Joanna and I had dated, met her at a Bible camp that I got kidnapped to. Talk
about that story. I love that story.
I was either junior or senior, but I did not want to go to this Bible camp. I mean, I had given my life to Christ, but I was still playing both sides, run a little bit. And so my parents had these big guys come over, and and they came in my room. I think I had gotten in like at 2 or 3 in the morning, and they show up at like 5:30, 6 in the morning. And I didn't know them at all. And these big guys come in my room, and they go, "Hey, Phil, you're going to camp this weekend." I said, well, "No, I'm not." And he said, "Yes, you are." And then they opened my closet. They asked my mom, "Where's the closet?" She said, "Right there." "What clothes do you want?" I said, "I'm not going." Well, they got me out of bed. We grabbed my clothes and we went. And I remember I stopped in Sugar Camp at a little store, and I bought a 6-pack of On Decker beer, and I had a little bag of marijuana with me. Ended up dumping all that stuff by a big pine tree with a guy named Gary that prayed with me and talked to me. And but that was where I met Joanna. I met her there. She was 15, and ended up kissing her on the chapel porch. And she said at that time she knew we were going to get married. I didn't know that, but she would send me these notes all the time. Again, no texting, no email, nothing like that back then. But I'd get these notes in the mail, and there were cards from her, and she'd say, "I'm praying for you." And she'd have a Bible verse and then just an encouraging note to me. And I'm like, this is a different girl, something different about her. And I was drawn to her. Even if I'd date other girls and stuff, I was just drawn to her. And then when everything got turned around later down at Kansas City, she was at Moody Bible Institute going there. And we just threw letters back and forth and talking on the phone. I remember I'd call her, and back then long distance was expensive.
Oh, yeah.
And so I remember the executive director of the ministry coming up one day, and he had a big smile on his face. And I had spoken at a youth group at a church in Holdridge, Nebraska. And he came up and he said, "Here's your $80 check for speaking." And then he smiled. He said, "Here's your $82 phone bill." And he took it back. It was from talking to Joanna over the phone. We'd just sit and talk. And so anyway, but then we ended up getting engaged and then married and went into youth ministry in a little town of Winter, Wisconsin, which was where I met John Gilberts, who introduced me to Holy Smokes.
Yeah, Holy Smoker in Colorado Springs, who we will have on the podcast shortly because of what you told me about his story. I'm like, oh my gosh, I got to get John on. He's a special dude. I love the guy.
Yeah, his story is amazing. And he was a kid that everybody in town was talking about this kid. And we had kids we were praying for, and the town constable, the police officer, John Manning, knew John well.
For the wrong reasons.
Yeah. But when John gave his life to the Lord, it was really an amazing thing. And Joanna and I didn't get much of a honeymoon, but we took a honeymoon trip, and John went with us. We were working with him, and we were so worried about him. But look at what he's doing now and what God's done with his life and Molly and amazing people.
Yeah. So Joanna was a missionary kid.
Mm-hmm. Yep. She grew up her grandparents were missionaries in South America, pilot, and her grandpa wrote a lot of books about cool little books about the mission field, and her parents then went into the mission field, her aunts and uncles. She grew up in South America.
Yeah.
And then they came back for, I think it was only like 4 or 5 years, and that's how I met her. Her dad was a pastor of a little church in a little town up here, and that's how I met her, through the Bible camp and stuff. But she grew up in the church, and very different home than mine. And
how good was that for you to have the tumultuous, toxic, dysfunctional home that you grew up in, to have this incredible woman, and your wife is a doll. She is just amazing. I love her.
Yep,
she's special.
Yep.
Was that a real stable force in your marriage, to have this person who grew up in a very healthy home, I assume?
She did. I mean, there was stuff.
Yeah.
like anybody, right?
Yeah.
But I remember when I would go to her grandparents' home with everybody for Christmas, and I was just like, I've never seen a family operate like this. I've never seen a family, and it was the Lord. I mean, I'd never seen anything like that. And I just loved being with her extended family, and all the things conversations that would happen, and the laughter and the games and all the stuff that they would do, and the prayer, and just hearing the stories about the mission field and things that were so out of my life, so foreign to me. So yeah, it was. I loved it. It was very stabilizing for me.
So you got married, you got into ministry.
Yep.
Talk about that.
So we got married, and we were doing youth ministry in a little tiny, way smaller than this area. And, back in the 80s, there wasn't a lot of youth pastors in these little towns. There was none. Mm-hmm. And so all these little churches, and we had Indian reservation there, and all these little churches had no youth pastors. So all these kids are just whatever. So we were like the youth pastor for
the area
for multiple denominations. So we did, probably the Youth for Christ model and Young Life. You'd have your Bible club on Wednesday night, Thursday, so we had different towns. We'd go to all these towns, and each night we had a different one. And then in the mornings we'd have some breakfast at our house, and we'd have these kids come in before school and we'd pray with them and just pray for their day. We had a list of kids that we'd pray for that they wanted to share with, and so that was, we lived that life, and we took them hunting and fishing trips, and take them fishing for 10 days out in the wilderness, and camping, and just spend quality time with these kids. And a lot of these kids most of them from split homes and pretty tough situations because of the area they lived in. And so we totally lived life with these kids.
Yeah.
And Joanna told me later how hard that was for her, because we're having babies, we have 5 kids, and she's having kids, and we're trying to do all this stuff, and Saturday night rallies and Bible quizzing and that whole thing, and our home, the front door was always open. But there was kids would just show up, they'd just be in there. And so for a young wife and a young couple and a young mother, those were hard times. And then we probably made $4,500, maybe $5,000 a year at the most. And, I remember going to the grocery store, and one time she was crying, and I'm like, well, what's going on? And she either had to get diapers or milk, and so we were going through that. So I'm like, all right, well, let's get the diapers. That was my answer. But, it's just, so it was a hard time for her, but she never said a word. She just never told me that till well after we left there. that was really hard for her to be there, but she felt like that's what God called us to. And it was, because we're still connected with a lot of these people today, and they're seeing their grandkids now and just seeing what God's doing in their life, and we had a part of that.
You had a creative way of feeding your family as well as the kids.
Can we really talk about this?
I think the statute of limitations has passed.
Okay.
I can safely say that the statute of limitations has passed.
Okay,
it's been 30 plus years.
Yeah, so Joanna grew up in a very, well, I don't want to say legalistic, but it probably was legalistic, the dogmatic right wing. And I grew up opposite of that, but I just wanted to provide for my family and these kids that were coming over. And so I'm like, man, we don't have any money. And so
Meat's expensive.
And I'm like, all right, God's given me the ability to take my little recurve bow, and I got plenty of arrows. And so I was allowed 2 deer a year, one with a rifle, one with a bow in Wisconsin. Mm-hmm. But those 2 deer would last about, maybe 2-3 weeks with all those teenagers in our family. So I'd go out in the evening in the winter and had a special place I went with a nice big hill, and these deer it was a funnel, and these deer just poured through there every night after dark. And so I had to practice, but I would shoot about 15 deer a year with my bow and find them then, and then get them in debone them, put them in a backpack, and sneak out of the woods, get back to my neighbor's house, an old trapper who taught me to trap, and I'd go over to Jim's house, and on his 2 big tables by his freezers, and he'd help me get that meat all packaged up, put it in freezer wrap, and then I would little by little bring it over to our freezer, and Joanna just thought those deer
just multiplied.
She just thought that, yeah, she was like it's like, and so later, like years later, when we were going to some counseling and stuff, and I told her all this, she's like, I don't know how I never caught on to that, how I never knew that we could. She knows now, that. Yeah. But she was just, babies and youth ministry and stuff, and I just kept bringing venison out. So yeah, there was a lot of venison.
But you almost got caught.
I did. So I was coming out I ended up coming out just after daylight onto the Tuscobia Trail by Winter, Wisconsin, and I see this truck coming, and here it is, the game warden truck. And I'm like, oh, man. And so I chucked my bow into the bushes, and I had my backpack on. I'm like, our ministry's over. I'm done. I should never have done this. I felt really guilty. And here's these 2 guys. Both of their daughters are in our youth ministry, and our son and a daughter. And they always called me Phaser, and they said, Phaser, what you doing? And I said to Ray, I said,
you have blood on your hands.
I have blood on my hands. And I said,
literal blood on your hands.
Literal blood on my hands. And I was going to start just telling them exactly what was up. I wasn't going to try and lie or, I was just going to say, I'm so sorry. And they stopped me and they said, we know what you're doing. Thanks for taking care of our kids, and just be careful. And off they went. And I would take those guys ice fishing every Martin Luther King Day. That was a holiday for them as state employees. Mm-hmm. And so I'd get a phone call from one of the guys, and he'd say, hey, Phaser, this is the Eternal Revenue Service. That's how he'd called me on the old landline. And he'd say, hey, we need you to take us. So I'd take them up to Sand Lake, and I'd take all these game wardens ice fishing. I'm like, here I'm taking them fishing, and I'm killing all these deer at night. So
15 deer a year.
Yeah. And John knows that culture well, and he has more stories than I do, not from himself, but how he was brought up and had to be to provide for him and his family too. And I did end up getting a few deer in their backyard as well later. I would climb up in this. John's mom and aunt would decorate this tree in their backyard. And either a maple tree or something, this big one, and I would wait till after dark, and I'd climb up there, and they'd turn the lights on, and the deer would come in, and I remember shooting deer out of that too at John's house. So anyway, yeah, so that was part of trying to raise a family in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah,
and then I trapped a lot and bought and sold deer hides as well, and so yeah, it was seems like 2 lifetimes ago, but It was pretty neat when I look back at it.
Yeah. But then you got back into the family business.
Did, yeah. We went to a Bible camp for 4 years, and then my dad was turning 70, and he still, I don't think he ever would have left the business. He'd have died in his chair. We came back, and I said, we'll come back just for 2 years to help him. I want to just help him and see if we can transition this business to somebody else. And so...
Because you had no interest in the family business.
I had none. Out of all my siblings, probably the least.
Really?
Yeah, I just didn't like it. I didn't like the business. I didn't like having to work there. My dad was always working. It kind of took my dad away, I felt. And so I was like, I'm never, ever going to have anything to do with this business. Well, I came back, and it was much more than I ever thought or imagined, and I could see the pressure my dad was under. And we ended up staying and getting my plumbing license, HVAC license, doing all that. And then my dad got me more involved in the business, and then we retired him at 71.
In what year?
2004, he finally retired. And so we took it over. We had been running it for a few years, but then we fully took it over then. And I'm glad we did. And we have an amazing company and team right now. So
yeah, but it wasn't always. You actually kind of stepped away and
we did.
Gave control to...
We did. So in 2014, I totally stepped away for the whole year and let a company come in and manage it because they wanted to buy it.
Mm-hmm.
And then in December 26th of 2014, they came in and we made the transition for them to buy the company. And we were really involved in Fellowship Adventures,
which is
outdoor ministry to men, with pheasant hunting, fishing in Canada. Now it's all over the country, but it's pretty unique ministry that Jeff Moore started with pheasant hunting in South Dakota. And then he came up here and wanted to catch a muskie. Another friend introduced me to him. Mm-hmm. So he came here and we spent 3 days here at our place and really hit it off around the campfire. And he said, hey, I have guys asking me about fishing. Would you consider doing this with me? And then we talked about turkey hunting and deer hunting. And Jeff is a man of action, a man of vision, but a man of action. And next thing I know, 2 months later, we're in Canada exploring these places with a couple other guys. And then the next year, we had our first trips with Compassion International, did the first 2 trips, and now it's, really, really grown. So we were getting more and more involved with that full time. And then, I'm up in Canada. Well, actually, I was in Wyoming on a bear hunt with one of the FA clients. And I ended up on a phone call with these people that were buying our business, and it was not going well.
How so?
We had employees that were with us for 20-some years, 15 years, a lot of tenure, and they were all leaving. This new owners were not, I just don't think they were treating them well, obviously, because they're all leaving, but these were like family to us. And so the business had dropped about 80% in volume.
Wow.
And there was some debt, so it couldn't do that with that debt. And I ended up on a phone call with the 2 guys, or the main guys buying it. And here I am with this client. I'm trying to be outside the hotel room in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, before we head up to the lodge in the mountains. And then all I have is a satellite phone. I'm talking to him, and I'm like, this is not sounding good. I real quick called Joanna, and I said, what's going on in the bank? What's going on with the business? So we finally saw that it was totally upside down. And I got up to the lodge, got on the satellite phone, got a speeding ticket on the way. I was like, oh, this is a good day. And got up to the lodge, and I'm sitting by one of those old, fences that are all made out of logs, crisscrossed, and beautiful spot. And I ended up talking to my manager, who's the only guy that's still there, that was from the original crew.
Yeah.
And I said, Kyle, I think we're going to have to take the business back if we're going to save it. And these guys are out. They're like it's upside down totally. All the money's gone, money market's gone, the bank accounts are gone, credit cards are all the Amexes are maxed out, vendors are owed a ton of money, and we have no employees. It was like a mass exodus. And so I remember I went into the lodge that night, and I'm just kind of realizing what's in front of me and how hard this is going to be. And I'm trying to be present with my guest and with the people there. And we had this amazing meal from the chef. And I had to excuse myself, and I went out behind the lodge and I just puked and puked. And I was overwhelmed with like, wow, this is going to be like hard. So I got back after the bear hunt and came back to the business and was quickly met by, our bank was there. They had my normal banker that I had a great relationship with, and he's a believer. And Larry said, Phil, he said, I'm really sorry, but we're handing you over to our asset banker. I was like, what is that? He said, well, we're putting you in a forbearance agreement. I said, what is that? And so I had to literally go online and look up forbearance agreement. I'm like, holy cow, I better get an attorney. So I had to go to an attorney, so that was right after Mother's Day in 2015.
So what is a forbearance agreement?
Forbearance agreement is actually, I looked at it as a bad thing, but they're circling the wagons, knowing that you're probably not going to make it. And so they control every penny you have. All our real estate properties, they made me go get. I didn't have a choice. So here you are, we're pouring cash into this, hundreds of thousands into this company, and it eats it up as fast as you put it in because it's so upside down. And so they made me go and get appraisals on all my buildings, all of our residential properties, commercial properties, vacant lands, and I had to get a appraised price on normal, like if we're going to sell it, what would that be? If I want a 90-day sale, what would that be? If I want to sell it today, what's that price? And all very different. I'm like, are you kidding me? I said, this is giving me income. I need that income, right now to feed our business. And this asset banker, he was brutal. I told him, I said, you should be in I call wife beater shirt, but the ripped off T-shirt in Newark, New Jersey at a pawn shop. I said, because that's the kind of guy you are. And he was always negative. And I said, Tony, I said, out of 10 people that you put in a forbearance agreement that you work with, how many make it? He said, 1.5 or 2. I said, well, let's have those conversations, all right? Let's look at it in that light. I need those conversations. How are we going to make it through this? So Joanna and I literally were selling everything, and I'm trying to have my game face on with my team, and people were bringing on and trying to cheer them on, like, we're going to make this, we're going to do this, and knowing the whole time. And I was not sleeping. I mean, I'd literally not sleeping. I'd be in the cold sweats in the middle of the night, get up and take a shower. My CPA, the bankers, everybody, the other bankers I was talking to were like, file bankruptcy. Get out of here. You're going to lose everything if you don't just close these. And I couldn't do it. I was like, I just could never imagine the conversation with my dad and uncle to say we lost the business. And so we fought through it. And I remember selling stuff, meeting a vendor. We'd sell a furnace. I didn't have money to buy it. So I'd sell something, we'd sell something, I'd figure out how to get the cash, and I'd run an hour south and I'd meet him in a parking lot he'd put the furnace in the back of my truck, and off I'd go and we'd put it in and make some money. And I remember one day being $88,000 in the hole in the bank account, and payroll was going to hit for, I think, 60-some thousand that day. And I'm waiting for the phone call, and sure enough, here it comes from my banker. I'm like, I'm pacing around the room. And so we got through all that. And
where did that tenacity come from?
I had a guy tell me, he said, you're stubborn. And he said, the only reason you made it is because you were dead and you were too stupid to lay down. He's like, you were dead, but you wouldn't lay down. You just kept going. And, I think it just part of the fight of my the negative, the pain part of my growing up, and the abuse and stuff, and the fight, and the drive, and not wanting to ever give up. Part of it came from that, probably, but I just didn't want to fail. And yet, a lot of people do, and that's why bankruptcy's there. It's not like a life-ending or devastating thing. It's there for a reason, right? And it just was the drive to not fail my family. If my dad and uncle had been gone, I probably would have just said, let's go do something else. But I didn't want to fail them. In this little town, our company's been there for so long. I also didn't want to fail our community. I also know the families of the vendors that we owed money to, and I wouldn't always have paid them back even if we did bankruptcy, because I know those families. So I think that's a big part of what drove us to get through it. And so we made it through, and now, and there's a lot of stuff in between all this, but now we have a top line like we've never had. We've grown over 30% the last 3 years. We're well beyond where we were, but our bottom line is amazing. We've got an amazing bank account. We're able to give, not just to our employees that have some needs, but to our community, to ministries, and do things that we've never been able to do before in a way I never would have imagined. So, God was faithful, Jehovah Jireh, the great provider. And, I look at it and I don't ever want to go through it again, but I'm very grateful for it. And we've learned a lot. We appreciate employees like I never did before. I thought I did, and I thought I loved them. But when you lose them, you realize how much they mean to you. And so now we've got all these new great employees, and I'd do anything for them,
And you have done anything for one of them. We were talking this morning.
Yeah, we've got one young man came to a plumbing and heating shop in Rhinelander, Wisconsin in a 3-piece suit to apply for a job. So he came 4 years ago, and he had worked for Thrivent Financial in Minneapolis as an HR guy for a bunch of pretty high-end guys.
Yeah.
Wanted to get out of Minneapolis. Came to Rhinelander. And man, I said, Adam, I said, we got a warehouse job for you. And he's like, I'll take it. I want to raise my daughter here. My wife's a teacher. So he took the job, and he's in the warehouse, and we had this plumber come up to him one day and say, Adam, if plumbing was easy, even you could do it. So Adam comes to me and goes, Phil, I want to be a plumber. So I was like, are you sure? Like, yeah, I want to be a plumber. I said, all right. So I got in the truck with him, and we worked all summer, and he went into the plumbing apprenticeship. And he has been, for our state, the plumbing board, like a role model student, just amazing. And to our company, amazing. And in May, he wasn't feeling real good. And you could tell something was off for like 3 or 4 months. He was just off. And I'm like, man, I hope we're not losing Adam, like to attitude or to whatever. If he's getting, I just didn't know what was going on. And so we had a talk with him when he went to the doctor, and here he's got pretty bad cancer. And it didn't sound good at all. Lymph nodes, and stomach is full of cancer. And I'm like, man, this kid has been doing so good. He's in his 4th year now. He gets to write his test next year. So we all rallied around him. And Adam, obviously can't work. And so he's going to Mayo and going through operations. And so our team, we decided to pay him 70% of his wage. Plus we did other stuff to help make up for that, and other people in the community did. But we're paying him his wage this whole time. December 28th, he comes back to work 20 hours a week. He'll be at our Christmas party, which will be a distant thing, but he'll be there this next week. But we had a birthday party for his daughter, Claire. He has one girl. And the fire department showed up, the police department. We had, 15, 20 of our trucks in line. An amazing day for his daughter, Claire, but I think even more for him. We just went over and put his Christmas tree up and helped him decorate, and, stuff that we couldn't have it would have been hard to do when we had no means or couldn't even think about that stuff when we're trying to survive. But yeah, it's drawn our company closer together. And so yeah, we've had other employees go through stuff, and part of being an employer, I think, is it's not all about the revenue on the top and bottom. We have all these families we get to affect, even our vendors and their families. And, it took that hardship for me to realize that was my mission. It's bigger than, great, someday you get to sell your business. What are you going to do? Well, it's the journey and the people that really, because we spend so much time together at your job, and so that's something I took for granted until we went through that.
And this year was when we first met, we met on the Zoom HERFs, the Zoom Holy Smokes that we did right at the very beginning of COVID. And it was looking like COVID was going to hurt your business. And I remember seeing that, just the concern on your face. I remember we prayed for you once or twice, and
Yeah, it was when COVID first hit, our sales took probably a 90% dive. And I'm like, man, we were just like cooking. We're doing good, we're cooking, it's going good, and then COVID. And that was about maybe a month. And then all of a sudden, everybody's at home. Everybody's staying home. They're using their plumbing more than they've ever used it. They're heating and air. Everybody's using these things called flushable wipes that are not flushable. And we were making bank off this, but telling people don't use these. And it's like, our sewer and drain was going great, our plumbing, our HVAC, and we had a record year. But it was horrible at first. And if it would have continued on that, it would be a different story in another battle. But like many people are having, which that's why we go to the restaurants when we can. We tip higher than we've ever tipped. We do whatever we can for these people in our community that are affected, by COVID because of the shutdowns.
Yeah.
So, but I'm glad we got through that.
Yeah, I was excited to hear at the turnaround. That's just very cool. Phil, I guarantee you there are people listening right now, some business owners that are listening, and they are in the position where you were in 2014, 2015, where it's upside down. They don't know where it's going to come from. They've been likely maybe hit by COVID. They could be listening years later and just going through something. What kind of encouragement would you want to give them?
Well, I think just getting some really good people in your life and staying connected to them. And that might be people that have walked it. It might be just people that you can be totally transparent with and say where you're at, to walk through that with you and to pray with you and to encourage you. And, the people around you, listen to, as much as I didn't like that banker, he did the right things. And your professional people around you. I have a few friends that, got me through that and helped me. And then some of the stuff my grandpa said that rings in my ears, about how to get through tough times, and my dad, and just the lessons in life that you've learned from your family, your business, the people around you, some good books. My banker gave me a great book, and it really resonated with me, and I kept listening to it on Audible. And
the book was?
It was Shoe Dog, the story of Nike, and just the story of how, whether I like or dislike Nike, the story of their business and their failures in the beginning and how they made it through some tough times like I was going through. It was like, man, there's people that have done this. And another book called The Road Less Stupid, and by Keith Cunningham. And Keith Cunningham, I believe, was, you have the rich dad, poor dad guy. I think he was the rich dad. He was actually the guy that was the rich dad for Robert Kiyosaki.
Yeah.
And so Keith wrote this book called The Road Less Stupid about mistakes we make in business and in life and in the HR stuff. And when we make wrong decisions, we have to pay what he calls a dumb tax. And I was like, man, this guy wrote this book about me. It's like, so I think just feeding yourself with really positive stuff like that. And then Joanna and I went through a hard time in the beginning because, when tragedy happens in a family, whether it's a business or a personal, it affects our family in ways that, kind of like when, my nephew just moved here from Atlanta, and he brought this pickup up here, and he's never been in the Northwoods. And I'm trying to tell him how to get his pickup ready for 20 and 30 below zero, and that his pickup's going to make some squeals and noises he's never heard before, and the weak spots are going to come out. And that's kind of what happened when we went through this hard time in the business. Is the weak spots showed up, my weaknesses, my areas that needed work on in my relationship with my wife and my kids and my family and my employees. And so in those hard times, those weak spots kind of show up, and you need help. So that, I don't know. Anyway, that's the stuff looking back, is there's people I'm really grateful for that stood with me through that, and I knew they were praying for me every day. And I could say anything, too. If I got mad, I could call them up and bellow off with them a little bit, and they were fine. Cigars helped me a lot. So, yeah.
Phil Frasier, let's get to rapid fire questions.
Hey everyone, before we get to the rapid fire segment, I wanted to talk about a way that you as a listener can support the show and the growth of Holy Smokes by becoming a monthly supporter at patreon.com/Holy Smokes. Patreon is a support platform, and for as little as $5 a month, you can get bonuses like ad-free versions of these podcast episodes, Holy Smoke swag like t-shirts, and more. That's patreon.com/Holy Smokes. We're looking to get 40 Patreon supporters at an average of $10 a month. And once we hit that, we'll be able to pay for all the costs for hosting, editing, writing, posting. I won't be paying for that out of my pocket or through the volunteering of my own personal time. And as we grow that number to 100 and 150, 200 patrons, we'll be able to do 2 shows a week, hire a part-time assistant and web developer, record on location and around the world, and more. I want to visit groups and get those stories from so many of you listeners that I hear from. I want to go to Seattle, and I want to go to Dallas, and I want to go to Charleston, South Carolina, and I want to go to Kentucky and Chicago and Phoenix, Atlanta, DC, Charlotte, back to Southern California, and more. We want to help grow your groups and plant new ones for those of you in areas without active groups. So, can you help us out? Become a regular supporter at patreon.com/Holy Smokes. There's a link in the show notes. That's patreon.com/Holy Smokes. Or if you want to make a one-time tax-deductible gift, go to paypal.me/Holy Smokes Club. That's paypal.me/Holy Smokes Club. And both of those links are in the show notes. Thanks.
When did you first get into cigars?
Well, I smoked a pipe for a lot of years. My dad smoked a pipe.
Did he?
Yeah, and he told me this in the last 5 years. I said, why'd you quit? He said, because I inhaled. He said, I would even lick the bowl if I could. He said, I loved it and I was addicted. So I remember one day he went out in the driveway and he took a hammer and he pounded all those pipes and beat them up, and he said, I'm done. And that was it. But I've always, when I played hockey, we had an outdoor rink in Rhinelander, and I'd be skating around the boards, and I knew when I went by my dad, I could smell his pipe. Yeah. I'm like, my dad's here watching me play hockey. And I loved it. And so I smoked a pipe I still do. I love black Cavendish aroma. Yeah, I love it. And when I'm in the boat fishing, I'll have cigars in my little cigar caddy, but I always have a pipe in there, and I'm smoking a pipe. But cigars, the first good cigar I had was with Jeff Moore in South Dakota, and he gave me a Fuente short story. And then we had the classic, and then we had the read between the lines. And I mean, I love Fuente cigars. I just really, really like them. And so that's really, so in 2012 is when I really started smoking cigars and enjoying them. And Joanna, again, grew up in that conservative family. So for me with the pipe, she liked the smell. Cigars at first, now she loves that I smoke them. Sometimes she'll say, "You need to go smoke a cigar," So it's she sees the what it does in calming and reflection, and so she's totally on board with it. She's not ready to try one yet. You tried yesterday.
I got her thinking about it.
Yeah.
I got her thinking about it.
Yeah, we need to get her some of the flavored cigars and see what she did. A hookah though. She did a hookah. So.
Yeah, you said that. So I told you guys got to come to Colorado Springs, and she gets around some of those holy smoke women, the holy grails in Colorado Springs.
She would love it.
Like Megan and Stevie and all of them. I guarantee you, I'll make sure that we'll figure out the flavored cigar that she would like.
That would be awesome.
And get her to try, maybe just a little cigarillo.
Yeah.
One of those little flavored cigarillos, and just, she gets around those women. I think we might get her. We might get her in.
She definitely. I mean, she's listened to all the podcasts and she loves it. So loves the holy smokes.
Do you have a preference between cigar or pipe?
Cigar is easier, and for that reason. But if I was like, I can either have a cigar or a pipe, it's your last one, I'd be over there grabbing my pipe and some black Cavendish and enjoy my pipe. But I love cigars.
Yeah. What's your favorite cigar?
Probably this right here, the Fuente Reserve, Grand Reserve. I love this cigar.
You got a bunch of them in your humidor.
Yeah, I do. Yep. And I like Romeo and Julietta's too a little bit. So.
Yeah, I saw the 1875 Reserves.
Yep.
Those are good ones. I like getting those. Most expensive cigar you've ever smoked?
Oh, I had a guy bring one to FA in Canada, and I mean it was an Alec Bradley, one of their top ones. I have the label somewhere. I don't remember which one it was, but it was really, really good. And I saved it for a very special time because he came and brought it to me. Said, "Phil, this is a special cigar. I brought it for you." And so Mark gave me that, and I smoked it with my son, Scott, in South Dakota on a hillside, just sitting with my son.
Your favorite dollar for dollar cigar?
Probably the classic, the Fuente Classic. It's reasonable and really, really smooth.
Where's your go-to place to get your smokes?
Cigars.com, and right in town, I like supporting these people put up a pretty cool humidor and got some really good cigars in there, and I like supporting them, so I go in there and buy, a dozen at a time. So they're more expensive than online, but it's for them, supporting them.
What's your favorite liquid pairing with your smoke?
My favorite is probably Woodford Reserve, even though we're drinking some good bourbon here, but I like Woodford.
Most interesting person you've ever met through cigars?
Ooh.
Because you've met a bunch with your time at FA. Fellowship Adventures.
You know what I'm going to say is probably the most interesting guy I've ever met. He's had a pretty big impact on my life. Been uber patient with me through all the business stuff and FA stuff. I'm going to say Jeff Moore.
Jeff Moore is the musician.
Right, Jeff Moore in the Distance, yeah. And Jeff has just loved my family, walked with me through a ton of stuff, and he's one of the most faithful men I've ever met in my life. And so, and he's interesting. So I love him and would do anything for him. But
That's saying quite a bit, considering all the names that we've talked about that have stayed here.
We've had, for some reason in this little corner of nowhere, there's been some pretty neat people come through here, and so. But I would say if I was going to have a cigar, if I said, you got a campfire, you can have a cigar with somebody right now, I'd want Jeff on that campfire. The conversation he brings out and draws and gives, and the relational stuff he does is pretty special. And he's just a great friend.
Best place you've ever smoked?
Up against a bunch of big round hay bales in a blizzard in South Dakota with two other guys just sitting there. It was just a magical, amazing moment. And we sat there and had a cigar and had great conversation up against those hay bales in a blizzard in the spring. So it's one of my favorite memories of a cigar. I've had some pretty neat cigars in neat places, but that was a great memory.
Favorite food?
Sushi.
We've talked about that.
By far.
Dogs, cats, neither or both?
Dogs, I love dogs. Cats, I like to watch and tease them, but I'm so allergic to them. But I love watching them. So I like them both. I just can't have one.
Yeah. Nickname growing up or in college?
Really?
Youth ministry. Yeah, let's hear it.
So when I was little, I'd get so busy. It's my family nickname. I'd get so busy. I'd be fishing. I'd be catching worms to go fishing in puddles until I was like 7 years old. And I'd get too busy and I'd piss my pants. And my dad finally is like, why don't you take the time? I said, well, I was fishing and I just had to keep fishing, And he's like, so he says, one day he looked down the road and here I'm walking with my fishing pole. And he says to my siblings, well, here comes Spot. And so I walk in and they go, hi, Spot. And I'm like, what? And I look down, I'm like, oh, that was the last time it ever happened. But my siblings all call him Lee Spot for years.
What's one unusual fact that few people know about you other than Spot?
I bought and sold deer hides by the semi-full when we were in youth ministry. I'd write a check for like $15,000, and again, we made like $4,000. I bought an old school bus, emptied it out, all the seats. I'd go buy these deer hides from guys, give them a check for like 15 grand, and hope that bus could make it 2.5, 3 hours to Eau Claire, Wisconsin, where this big buyer was. He'd write me a check. I'd make it back to my hometown with a check bigger and put it in the bank. And I did that for like 4 or 5 years and became one of the best buyers in the country in that 4 or 5 years. Paid for one of our kids' birth because we didn't have insurance. Bought 80 acres of land and a four-wheeler, stuff I never could have afforded just by buying and selling semi-loads full of deer hides eventually. So kind of a weird thing, but I did it.
You're a reader. You love listening to audiobooks. Favorite 1 to 3 books not titled the Holy Bible?
Well, I really, just because of where I'm at right now, that one, The Road Less Stupid, I like that. I liked Shoe Dog. Again, it's a story about a guy that struggled and how he got through it. A third book. I like a lot of John Maxwell stuff. I think Talent, was that one, Talent Alone Isn't Enough? I like that book.
Okay.
So anyway, that's...
Yeah. Do you have a life scripture?
Yeah, and 1 Corinthians 15:58 says, be totally steadfast, unmovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, and knowing that your labor is not in vain. But it also, one of the guys that mentored me spiritually told me that I chose that verse because I was driven, and being driven is not right. He said, you spiritualized your drivenness by choosing that verse. And so it was just always about driving and driving and driving, unmovable, unstoppable, go, 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 go. But I still like the verse, but the other one is be still, which is the opposite. And that's, Joanna put that up actually in one of our rooms. And, so I've been trying to focus on that and realizing that I don't always have to be moving and doing, and it's okay to sit down on the deck and just do nothing for an hour, which is against me, or take a nap, which I'm not a napper. So I'm trying to focus on that. So those are a couple, I guess.
If you could be any animal, what would you be?
Have you ever heard of a fisher?
Mm-mm.
So a fisher is probably it's like a bigger marten, a smaller wolverine, and they're a pretty cool animal in the Northwoods here. And amazing hunters, smart, they're a really cool animal. But that's kind of what I would say my life has been like. But so I guess the fisher, they were brought in to get rid of the porcupines. So they'll dive under a porcupine, under its belly, knock it over, grab it by the throat, and then eat the porcupine from the bottom up, But they're a pretty amazing animal. And I've watched them, and they're hard to see. You don't see them often. And I've trapped a few that I've had to let go. And they were hard to trap and hard to let go. But because they're ferocious little buggers. But I really like the Fisher. I think it'd just be, they see a lot of country. They're always moving.
Huh.
So, kind of like
cool.
you and hiking.
If you could live anywhere, where would that be? Because you've traveled a lot.
Yeah.
Caught fish in all 50 states?
Yeah, caught fish in every state in 5 years. Joanna and I love this little place called Palm Island in Florida. And you got to take a ferry to get out there. And it's 7 miles of pretty private, quiet beach. We can look for shark's teeth. I can fish, sit on a cooler. She walks the beach, we walk the beach, and we love watching the dolphins and just hearing the tide, and that's kind of our happy place.
What's your greatest strength and what's your greatest weakness?
Probably the same, my drivenness. I really do believe that, and it's just, I am driven and push hard, which, sometimes I take my family and friends on a roller coaster ride that they have blindfolds on and don't know where we're going. And, but also when the chips are down, I feel like it's a strength too that I don't want to give up, and especially if I know I'm not supposed to.
Who's the first person you think of when you hear the word successful?
My dad. My dad pushed through so much in his life personally, from his upbringing to raising 9 kids to working through this little small business with 9 kids, his relationship with my mom that was tumultuous,
But then,
to his faith in Christ.
But then became so loving.
Yeah, and so that's the first person I think of when I think of success is my dad.
Mm-hmm. What do you do for self-care, to rest, to recharge?
It's definitely time on the water in the woods. Nothing does it to me. I can be, having like when we were going through those really hard times, I'd be in Canada, I'd get on the sat phone, Jeff and all of us would have the boats ready down at the dock and guys ready to get in them. And my stomach would be spinning and I could only talk for 5 minutes to our company, and I'd get in that boat and light a cigar and I would forget that anything was wrong, and I think I could be sick, really sick, and get in a boat and I think everything would be okay for those moments. So I love the water, I love being in the boat. So that's my happy place.
All right, we're in America's Dairyland. I haven't asked this question in a while. What's the best type of cheese?
Ooh, there are so many good ones. The one I really, really like when we do you call it charcuterie tray, it's got a wine. There's 2 of them. One's got a pepper all the way around it, and the other one has a red wine flavoring all the way around it. It's a white heart. I can't remember the name of it. I just know right where it is in the store, and I grabbed 2 or 3 of each of them. It's a harder cheese. Joanna would know the exact name of it, but those are my favorite cheeses. I love them. And I love Swiss. I love a really, really good baby Swiss.
All right, last 3 questions. What does Holy Smokes mean to you, and what has it meant for your spiritual journey?
Well, this spring, I think that's when John introduced me to it, and he said, check this out. These guys have breathed life into me like not many others have. I was like, all right, I'll check it out. And I was kind of reserved at first to do it. And then he introduced me. I was like, oh, he did this already. And so I was like, oh. And so, people greeted me, which was really cool. But then he sent me a link to your podcast. And man, I needed that so bad. I couldn't stop listening to him. So I went all the way back to the beginning and I just started listening and listening. I was sitting at home here for like 3 weeks, but I was listening and listening. And then it did exactly what John said. It was just life-giving, hearing people's stories and you talking with them. And then you guys did I guess we guys, I'm we now, did the Zoom meetings.
Yeah, the virtual Holy Smokes.
I was like, really, am I going to do this? Do I do this or not? I remember going in, I'm going to get out of here. I go in and this is really neat. And so it refreshed me spiritually in an amazing way to hear these people talk so transparently through all the ups and downs. And even I remember, them saying that silence is okay. That was brought up a few times. And in the podcast, hearing the lighter click and people relighting, I was like, this is so cool. so it's been amazing. And I'm really grateful you're here. Never thought we'd ever do this. So it's been life-giving to me. It really has. And none of us knew. And you've had an extremely difficult 2020, but none of us knew what this would bring. But that brings hope, life, and regeneration to us, all of us, as we share in this community.
You got to start a Holy Smoke chapter here
in the
Northwoods.
I just need people. I can find some. We'll find some.
Oh, yeah. Start doing some regular meetings. I want to see some pictures in the group. I want to see some pictures of the Facebook group. All right. If you could have a Holy Smoke with any 3 people throughout history, living or deceased, who would they be? Can't name Jesus.
I think I even kind of talked about this yesterday a little bit as we were just talking about our families, but there's a lot of amazing people I'd love to sit around with. Teddy Roosevelt, different ones that I can think of that I just love to hear from. But my 2 grandpas and 4, I'd love to talk with my 2 grandpas and their fathers and just learn about our family, them, their upbringing, and, the questions that, I was really close to both my grandpas. I was 14 when one died and lived with him the last year of his life as he was fighting cancer to help him. He taught me to cut a tree down with a chainsaw. My other grandpa was like, sit on your lap, Grandpa. He'd make all these things for you. My other grandpa was, life's tough,
You told me some of his sayings.
Yeah.
The grandpa that took over the business from your great grandpa.
Right. Yeah.
He was an interesting cat.
He's interesting. Yeah. And he had his own way of showing love. Not a hugger, but my questions today for them would not be what they were then. And I would have very, very different questions for them. And then I would love to get to know, my 2 great-grandfathers are just a mystery to me. It seems like it, and it's not that long ago if you think about it, but it's like I only hear stories,
Well, you told me about your great-grandpa that started the business. He was a pastor's kid, right?
Well, my grandpa, his grandfather was a circuit riding preacher.
Yeah.
He rode around the horse and set up the tent, and my grandpa went with him. But something happened that my grandpa just turned until his last year, but turned away from any type of Christianity. Mm. Yeah, but that's who I'd want to sit around with. If I could have a cigar with any people, that would be the most meaningful to me, and I'd draw the most out of, I think, to connect some dots and answer some questions I might have and learn more about my family. So.
Last question. If we're to meet 1 year from today, and I got a bottle of your Woodford Reserve, what are we celebrating?
What are we celebrating? Well, I'm definitely going to be celebrating that I got 3 more granddaughters. They're coming. So I'd be 9 grandkids. And to me, it's more of I guess, just where I'm at in my faith journey. I'd mentioned my really good friend took his life a few years ago.
We were talking about that last night.
Yeah, and that set me back a bit. And so it's been a faith journey back, and Holy Smokes has played a big part in that. So just celebrating, where I am in restoring my faith and trust in that whole walk. That's, the business is what it is, and Lord willing, our family is still intact, but really what's important to me is where I'm at there. So that's what I'd want to celebrate.
Phil Frasier. Frasier Heating and Plumbing in Rhinelander, Wisconsin. Fishing guide, hunting guide with Fellowship Adventures, and just hanging out here in the Northwoods of Wisconsin. Thanks for being on the Holy Smokes podcast.
Well, thank you. This has been awesome.